Now, detonate the reality bomb!
I will build a great, great wall.
Some alien race to come down and threaten us.
Is the singularity near?
The military-industrial complex.
The truth is out there.
The 7 mountains of the influencers of culture.
To be as gods, you know.
Change has come to America.
Catapult to propaganda.
From a secure location on top of the ridge in the heart of the beautiful Missouri Ozarks, this is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert. At ease.
The government of China is live harvesting organs from prisoners of conscience. Welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. Special program for May 26th, 2019. As we are currently in the middle of our tour of the Holy Land, Israel and Jordan, we are digging into the archives here at View from the Bunker to bring you a couple of programs that I don't think got enough attention when they came around the first time. I was in the middle of a stretch of doing the program on a periodic basis, was not holding to a regular schedule as well as I would have liked. That happens while we're busy here, but now that we're committed to doing this every Sunday evening, thought, well, while we're away, let's at least take advantage of the 10 years of archives that we've got here. So we've got some best of programs coming to you for the next 4 weeks, which will cover not only the time that we're still away, but also the first few weeks that we get back, to give me time to get back on the ground, also to sort through the video that we're collecting while we're overseas. The programs that we're bringing to you now were originally aired or streamed to the internet back in 2016. So about 2.5 years ago, I had become aware of a documentary film called Hard to Believe. The film so titled because the practice it describes is quite literally hard to believe. The government of China harvesting organs from living prisoners who have been convicted of no crime other than a victim of conscience. Christians, members of Falun Gong, political dissidents, considered inconvenient by the government of China. They are used as raw material in an operation that serves medical tourists who cannot, through normal channels, receive an organ donation to preserve or extend their lives. First, the producer of the film, we bring you Rubacek of Swoop Films to discuss the documentary Hard to Believe.
I think the movie is aptly titled because when we describe what is going on, most people say, well, I find that hard to believe. I can't believe that this actually happens, that a government that seeks to present itself as enlightened and world-class as the Chinese government is actually using prisoners of conscience as raw material for live organ harvesting.
Yes, they are. And that is the biggest problem, is that the issue is so hard to believe. And that's one of the reasons why it hasn't had a lot of the traction that it should have had. It's not a new story. This has been going on for a long time. And I first learned about this in 2006. So I've been following the story since then. And during that time, there's been so much evidence, and a recent report that came out by some investigators, who were in the film, that came out just a month or two ago, is they said there's not a lack of evidence. The problem is there's so much evidence, and for there's been books written about this topic now. There's been movies made about it. There's documentary here about it, but the problem is that there is a lot of evidence, but people are still just putting it in the too hard basket. It's too hard to believe. It's too difficult to deal with China. They're putting it into that category, and they're pushing it aside because it's a big can of worms. But when you can break through that issue, so many things can be resolved. So it's an issue that's really important to tackle, and it's one that really affects us here as well as all other countries, not just China.
You've been aware of this since 2006. Again, most people aren't even aware that it is going on at all. Why is there this wall of silence that separates the activity of the Chinese government from the rest of the world?
Good question, and that's really what the documentary Hard to Believe looks at. Is we didn't just go into trying to prove or disprove is this happening or not. We really after Ken Stone, the director, really got involved in this and started investigating, and he had no idea that this was going on prior to working on this documentary just a year or two ago. Mm-hmm. So it was really great to be working with someone like Ken, and also Irene Silver. She was another producer on the film. And neither of them had any knowledge before about this going on. And so they really wanted to take the approach of finding out why do people not know about it? What is that wall of silence? And a number of things we came up with. I mean, the biggest issue is that it's hard to believe. It's hard to believe that doctors are cutting up people while they're alive mm-hmm. and selling their organs for profit. And these are not criminal prisoners. The biggest issue is they are not. We don't want to do it from criminal prisoners either, but, these are not even criminal prisoners. They've done nothing wrong. So being hard to believe is the first topic, the first reason. But there's also these political reasons that have come in. There's the majority of the people that are being used as having their organs removed are people who practice Falun Gong. Mm-hmm. It's a spiritual meditation practice in China that grew hugely popular. But the then president wanted to eradicate it because he felt it was a threat to atheism in communist China. Right. So here's a very traditional group that has, traditional beliefs, but atheists, communism is essentially atheism. They didn't want that. And it was really that dictator, Jiang Zemin, he went against the whole faction to bring about the persecution. But these people, there's just so many of them. They're rounding them up into prisons and keeping them in jail, and they couldn't get rid of them. So one of the biggest, to maintain this persecution against peaceful people, the Chinese Communist Party had to do something. So what they've done is they've created this whole field of lies and propaganda around to sustain this persecution. And that has spread outside of China to America. That's spread out to all the governments. So even though people will see Falun Gong practitioners or see the exercises and see that it's harmless or even beneficial, they are getting this propaganda from the Chinese government. They get threats and coercion saying that you cannot deal with these people because otherwise we won't deal with you. And that kind of threat has caused a lot of confusion because people in the media and government, they've said to me, they've said to others, we don't know who to believe. We hear information from people who practice Falun Gong, and we hear information from the Chinese government, and very few people have stood in the middle to say, I don't practice Falun Gong, and I'm not part of the government, but I think you should stop this. Ethan Gutman, the author of The Slaughter, David Matus and David Kilgore, they're all independent researchers, lawyers, authors. David Kilgore is a former Secretary of State in Canada. They independently stepped forward, and so they have been very remarkable in being able to bring this issue forward not on behalf of the victim community, but on behalf of the international community. So, but it's really difficult when there's not many of those types of people stepping forward, and the others who should be doing something are on either side or feeling that they don't know who to believe because there's just this propaganda constantly coming out. And it's the Chinese Communist Party has turned this into a political issue, unfortunately, which it shouldn't be. It should be a human rights issue.
I used the figure tens of thousands at the opening of the program. Is that an accurate number, and how do we know, where does this estimate come from?
Good question. Well, that estimate came from research that had been done and published in, it's about three books now, The Slaughter, and then another book, Bloody Harvest, written by David Matus, David Kilgore, and there was another book, State Organs, that was compiled by David Matus and Torsten Trey, who runs the non-governmental organisation called Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting. So those figures those researchers independently came to similar figures, somewhere between, I think Ethan Gutman had set up to, between 40 to 60,000 over an 8-year period. Now, more evidence has surfaced this year since Hard to Believe had been released. And the latest figures that Ethan Gutman and David Matas, David Kilgore have released is that by investigating the amounts of transplants being done in hospitals currently in China, that we're looking at more like 100,000 a year.
100,000 a year?
A year.
Wow.
Now, when you think about that amount, in China, there were up to, the government estimates were up to 100 million Falun Gong practitioners were practicing in 1999. Now, after that, Ethan Gutman's, after his research into the Chinese labor camp system, said that at any point in time, there's 500,000 to 1 million Falun Gong practitioners in prison at any point in time.
Huh.
So these numbers are huge, but China's huge. The problem's huge. But we're talking about individual human beings here. But when you look at the numbers, it's big, right? It's big. But they're the numbers that they're playing with, and they don't want anyone to just go and multiply it, because when you multiply it, it becomes phenomenal. But they are just looking at the hospitals in China, how many transplants they are performing a year, and they're saying it's around 100,000 transplants a year. And now China has a very small voluntary donor system. Mm-hmm. It's in its infancy. It's only just started. It was not around in 2006. It was not around when Falun Gong practitioners first started being persecuted and being used for this. So it's very small. The organ donors are very small. Traditionally, Chinese don't do that. So they don't donate their organs. They want their body to be kept whole when they pass away. And criminal prisoners, China's admitted that they kill their prisoners for organs. And they don't distinguish between criminal prisoners and political prisoners or prisoners of conscience. But the criminal prisoners, there's a very high rate of hepatitis B. There's a high, it's difficult to match and find healthy people for organs from certain ages, especially across all ages. So there is, unfortunately, this huge organ donor bank, which they have. They've even gone into homes. This is something that we didn't report in the film, and we haven't. But there has been reports coming out of China. We didn't include it in the film because it was hard to get more, tangible evidence. But we do have reports of people in their homes who practice Falun Gong that have had police force their way in and take swabs from their tissue from their mouth, so that they could be entered onto this database.
That sounds like something from a horror film.
It is a horror film. I mean, when you think about it, right? They're using. I talked to a doctor recently, and he said that another doctor had told him that he needed. There was a burns victim, and this is a case in China. There was someone had serious burns, suffered serious burns all over the body, and he was able to get a full skin, because when you have serious burns, if you put graft skins from other part of the body, then it helps to heal. Mm-hmm. But this person was able to receive a full human skin to size over their body, and it had a miraculous healing effect, because that's what it does. But how do you get it?
How do you get where? Who? Yeah. Who? Oh.
This is what people are getting. And when you look at one thing, organ donation, there's organ donation, and it's it's a serious issue because people need organs. But then you also look at the medical research that are being done, the studies that are being done. They are finding so many ways in China to use the human body because they do not value the lives of these people.
It's a utilitarian view of human life.
Very much, very much. And that's something that I think we as people have to make a choice on. Do we accept that or not? And do we want that from our neighbours? And if we know our neighbours are doing that, are we going to say something? Or are we just going to pretend that we don't know that they're doing that right next door? Because we are in a global community. They are right next door to us. We're buying products from them. We're travelling there. We're training their doctors here to do that. There are colleagues that have told me, I've said, we've spoken to them and said, hard to believe, here's the film, would you like it for your college? Yes, we want it. And then they come back and say, I'm sorry, we have too many teachers, students and teachers and doctors here from China. We are afraid to show the film because we're afraid we might upset them. And I've had other ethicists from other colleges say to me, you should tell them that is not ethical, and that this film is a good way for people to introduce it to students, to introduce it to Chinese people, to introduce it to educators, give them the tool to talk about it. It shouldn't be a taboo topic. It should be something that people can talk about it and just be able to bring up over conversation and say, well, I don't think that should be happening, the same way we bring up any abuse happening anywhere in the world. Anyway, that's...
Yeah. No, as a Christian, I obviously have a certain view of human life, which is that as we are created as God's imagers, not necessarily in his image, but his imagers, his agents, moral agents on earth, there is a certain value to human life regardless of our limitations or handicaps. And so it should be protected regardless of whether the person is a political prisoner or a criminal prisoner or not. I mean, I'm not opposed to punishments for certain crimes, but still, that is something to be taken very seriously. You don't take a human life just because this person disagrees with your political philosophy and someone else has need for that with the same blood type needs a kidney. I just ran some rough numbers here, which is why I was looking away from the camera for a couple of moments and just pulled up very quickly on an internet search, rough numbers. If a kidney, black market kidney, and I don't know how this is, and I'll ask you this in just a moment, but black market kidney in China, roughly $60,000.
Yes.
If that's 100,000 of them a year, you're talking $60 billion in revenue.
Yes. They're making hotels next to the transplant hospitals to be able to house the patients so they can move them out of the hospital beds and get more people into the beds. It's there. If you have a look at that report that came out, I think it was June or July this year, an update, it's called Bloody Harvest / The Slaughter, an update. So it's an update on those two books presented by both sets of authors. It's available free online at a website called endorganpillaging.org. And that you can see in there the raw data that they've gathered from sources all across China, and the transplant hospitals. They have photos of these hospitals, and the size of them, the amount of money that is going into this. It is not something that's stopping. On one side, the transplantation community, they've had some pressure put on them to try and do something to stop it, but they're right. They feel responsible that they have to help China use the tools and know how to use the tools and work with them. But unfortunately, it's not making a difference. China is saying, well, we're not using executed prisoners anymore, but they're not saying who they're using or where these organs are coming from. And on the other hand, we see these hospitals are booming, absolutely booming. The industry is not about to close down. Absolutely not. They are building these hospitals, and they have been building them, especially since 1999 when the crackdown on the Falun Gong practice started. And that's when they were doing it before in small amounts for certain people who needed an organ. They could order it through the prison system. But at that point, that's when it began to skyrocket. And it doesn't look like it's slowing down.
When you start with a premise that the only life that you have is the one that, in this time-space continuum, if you don't believe in an afterlife, then you feel justified in using any means necessary to extend that. I don't have a problem with people. I've known family members who died for lack of available transplant organs. So, this is something I can relate to an extent, but boy, I mean, if you know that you're going on to a greater reward, you're not willing to take someone else's time in order to extend your own, I think, at least I hope. But China being officially atheist is coming at this from a different perspective. A science fiction author that I whose work I've been a fan of for decades, Larry Niven, was writing about this in the 70s. He foresaw this coming, and he wrote about a phenomenon called organ legging, and even wrote in his series called the Known Space series of a practice that was government sanctioned, and where you begin with the prisoners convicted of capital crimes, and then you move to the prisoners who are in for life, and then you move to the prisoners who are just convicted of major felonies, and pretty soon you're down to the people with outstanding parking tickets, as a source of raw material to extend life because people want to live forever. And I guess the question I have to ask is, are the recipients of these organs only Chinese citizens, or do we have people in the West who are traveling to China in order to get these organs?
People are traveling, and the phrase is transplant tourism, where there is no law in America to prevent or even advise anyone for or against going to China or other countries to get an organ. There was a report, in Australia, there's been some studies done where they found, I'm not sure over what period of time it was, but 100 people over a period of time have gone to China to get their organs from Australia. We have a booklet that goes with the film Hard to Believe, and in here we have a little diagram. There have been some studies in America, not many, but we have actually, you can find this on the website, on the hardtobelievemovie.com website. So there was a study done at Mount Sinai Hospital. This was in the 2004 to 2006. There was 300 US patients went to China to receive the transplants. They went abroad, but mostly got their organs from China. And in UCLA, they did a study on transplant tourism, and over a 4-year period, 42% of the transplants of people leaving the country had got their transplants done in China. The Chinese hospitals have been advertising as early as even a year or two ago. They were advertising in a huge way before all these reports came out in English, advertising their hospitals, their services online, saying that you can get a liver in a week, and there's a guarantee. And we've heard anecdotally stories of people that have gone, the first liver didn't work, so they got another one while they were there. There was a heart surgeon from Europe, I believe Sweden, but he was definitely from Europe, who was there, and they asked him, do you want to do the heart surgery in the morning or the evening? And he said, and he refused to participate at that point. He said, I can't. If you can schedule it like that, there's something wrong. And he refused to participate. And that's the choices people have. They can say, okay, well, I'm just going to pretend nothing's wrong, but something is wrong. And you can pretend it's not wrong, and you can maybe ask a few questions, but unfortunately, it is a system that cannot be trusted. It is not transparent. It is run by a regime that does not value life. And at any point, if they can do that to their own citizens, what could they do to me or you? Yeah. It's really not a system that can be trusted, and that's been proven. Even in 2001, they vehemently denied that they were killing executed prisoners for their organs. And then in 2005, they admitted that 95% of their organs come from executed prisoners, and that they've been doing this for a long time. So they proved that they completely lied, and it just keeps happening again and again. So it's a system that is not usable for us. And if we try and get into that system in any way, it's dangerous. So it's really important for people to know what they're getting into, to understand what this regime is, and to not put themselves at risk. I mean, whatever the risks are here, if you don't have, you need an organ. But even if you go there, there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee of the health and the success rate of that transplantation. There's many cases that have not been successful. So we really need to be looking at what we can do here to and prevent people going, or at least be aware of what's happening if they go over there. People need to know.
I think just the moral component alone, knowing that, this came up in another story recently. There has been a story in recent weeks of a gentleman from Russia who suffers from a severe spinal a congenital degenerative disease, which has basically confined him to a wheelchair. And there's an Italian neurosurgeon who's claimed that he can take the gentleman's head and transplant it onto a new body. And most of the discussion has revolved around whether this will ever be successful or not. Most of the experts say this will only lead to, even if the patient survives, a new, I forget the way one doctor put it, but he says something like a new level of madness or something, because the neurological connections just won't match up the way they're supposed to. But the one question nobody's been asking, and a friend of mine pointed this out, well, where's the donor body coming from? And I think that's the question that needs to be asked whenever anybody is engaging in this type of transplant tourism. And again, knowing a couple of family members who perished for lack of, one case of heart, another case kidneys, and knowing that those thoughts went through their minds, gee, I wonder what it's like if I, go to India. China wasn't even on the radar. They thought India was the place you had to go in order for this to happen. But then they ultimately decided against it because of the questions of safety and reliability. Again, the thought that these donor organs might not be willing donors never crossed their minds either. Since independent researchers like Ethan Gutman, for example, were able to come up with these numbers and document that this is going on, I have to believe that government intelligence agencies, whose job it is to know everything that's going on in places like China and Russia, know that this is going on. What does the U.S. government know, and what has been the reaction to the film Hard to Believe?
We believe they know a lot more than what they're letting on, and that the commercial interests are overpowering the human interests.
Our demand for cheap shoes and cheap electronics.
Yeah. Our debt to China, commercial. Unfortunately, that's the reality. We interviewed a few politicians for Hard to Believe. Let's say, okay, there has been some reaction. Hard to Believe it was released. It's been screening on PBS since last September, and now it's just released digitally on iTunes, Amazon, Google Play, and Vimeo. But during that time, we've had over 100 screenings worldwide now, plus broadcasts on PBS, and it's one piece of the puzzle. There's a lot of people that are active on this issue, but what we have seen is that this year, the U.S. Congress unanimously passed a resolution to condemn the practice of organ harvesting in China. Now, in Hard to Believe, we looked at a previous resolution that didn't even come up for a vote, even though 285 members had co-sponsored that resolution. Now, we looked at why it didn't even come up for a vote. And one of the reasons we found, it was that the political, commercial, trade interests and things were just getting it pushed aside, and the threat and pressure from the communist regime is real, and it's strong. And they have such an abuse towards, especially people who practice Falun Gong, to push the government, the U.S. government, to not do something about it. But that resolution did pass this year, and so that is something pretty significant. It's not law binding in any way. It just sends a message that this is not tolerable. But the government, absolutely, it cannot be that they don't know what's going on in China, and that if they do know about it, if they wanted to find out more, they can absolutely find out more as to why they're not doing more, why they're not putting in laws to stop people from going over, or prevent them from going over, or prevent, perhaps like what Israel did. They prevented the government from paying for all the aftercare, so that it's not on the taxpayers to pay for the aftercare of people going and doing this overseas. The American government can do that. But right now they haven't as yet. So I think they know what's going on. And for other reasons, there's other things that they're putting at a higher priority.
Well, again, and that's on us, because if it wasn't for our demand for cheap shoes, cheap electronics, and the demand from people in the West for those organs, there would be no no need to supply them.
If I could add to that too, sorry, it's not so. In addition, the other demand is education. So we are using education from China. There's we're training their doctors here, and we're educating their students here. They're bringing their education system into Confucius institutes across the country that are run by the communist state.
Yeah.
And we have, our students and children going through these soft power, whatever you want to call them, but it's not run by, our government or education system here. So there's a lot of things that we're buying giving back to China in exchange for it. So while we keep up this exchange and dialogue and not know who we're really dealing with, then
I'm sorry, we kind of glitched there. We missed a little bit of what you were saying at the end there. For some reason, our connection got a little wonky there. If you could go back to the beginning there, where you were just talking about the exchange of students and the educational system, the Confucius Institutes that they're setting up here. Again, for some reason, we lost about 15 seconds there, and I thought we dropped the connection entirely. Nope, looks like we did drop the connection again. It's pausing and freezing here on this side. We could continue the conversation. I know this basically has only scratched the surface, but because of the connection here, maybe at this point it would be best to just wrap up and tell people where they can see the film. And I'll be talking with director Ken Stone. That program will be broadcast on the podcast and on the vidcast next week. So, Kay, if you could just let people know, where do they find out more information for their own research, and where do they watch the film?
Go to resources to find out all about the issue, and you can watch Hard to Believe from the website directly there. We have you can click to buy or rent it right from the homepage at hardtobelievemovie.com. If you prefer Amazon or iTunes, Amazon Instant Video, iTunes, we have the links right there on the homepage as well.
And now on A View from the Bunker, the second part of what could have been a two-part interview when we first uploaded these to the web back in September of 2016. He is a documentary film producer who describes the difficulty in producing a film on this disturbing topic, and especially the difficulty of trying to tell the story in a convincing way in the format of a 1-hour documentary film made for television. Ken Stone, director of the documentary film Hard to Believe, on A View from the Bunker.
Thank you.
This is a topic that really makes your guts twist. How did you get involved with this particular project?
Actually, a longtime collaborator of mine, Irene Silber, said that she had been working with a cameraman on a project, and it was just a small video. I think it was about veterinarians, something like that. And they were just talking during some downtime, and the photographer, Matthias Magnuson, who actually ended up working on the documentary, had mentioned Irene that this was going on, and he always wanted to tell a story about it, and he was so frustrated that, in particular, American media just tended not to pay attention to it. So she thought it was really interesting, and Irene and I had collaborated before on a couple of other documentaries that we had been able to get on public television stations around the country. And so she called me up and said, "What do you think?" And so the story, I wish I could say, is like, well, that's hard to believe. I mean, I didn't say that right away.
Yeah.
But I thought, well, I don't know. Let me look into it. So I started to look into it. And one of my first sources was the David Matas book that he wrote. And then I read, found out about Ethan Gutmann and got a hold of Ethan Gutmann, a journalist, longtime American journalist, who has been writing about this topic and other China topics for 20 years. And then after I read those two books, I thought, yeah, there's a story here. And to me, what was interesting, and this is sort of selfish, but it's like, wow, this story really hasn't been told that much before. And I'm an old news guy, and you get a chance to tell a story that really hasn't been told much. That's an opportunity you tend to jump at.
Mm-hmm. You've got a background that didn't start in film. You've got a kind of a diverse background in media, news, talk radio, and so forth. What led you into your filmmaking? Was it to tell stories like this, and how far afield is this particular story from the type of thing that led you to filmmaking in the first place?
Two different questions there.
I have a tendency to ask that to do that.
The first one is I had worked in radio and TV newsrooms for 20 years, mostly as a reporter, but also as an anchor, host, talk show, news director. I mean, all that stuff. Basically, I couldn't hold a job like anybody else in TV news.
I've been there.
So when I got laid off from my last television news station, I thought, well, what's next? And I ended up starting to teach, and I taught at the University of Minnesota for 7 years. But I had a boss there who said, we love your work, but we're not going to pay you very much because you're an instructor. You're not a tenured professor, so you should keep busy on the side. So I just started to do work on the side, mostly for nonprofits, and most of the stuff that I've worked on, was 2 to 5 minutes long. But during that time, I stumbled into a couple of projects that were half-hour documentaries and that kind of thing. So there was no intention to become a documentary film producer or director. It's just one of those things about, that looks interesting. And so I ended up doing the story. I did a story about post-traumatic stress with returning warriors from not Vietnam. Well, actually, it included Vietnam, but it was primarily Afghanistan and Iraq. And the challenge that mental health professionals were going to have, because there are literally not enough mental health professionals to handle the tidal wave that's coming back. So I got interested in that. I did a documentary on that. And so that is... sorry, I got a phone call here.
That's all right.
I'm declining. So I stumbled into it. And just as I stumbled into the story about organ harvesting, so it was far afield. I'm not an international reporter. I don't know a whole lot about China. I'm certainly not a medical expert either. And I knew very little about the Falun Gong. And so all of this was new. And so I went into it with what I thought was a relatively fresh set of eyes, because it's like, well, I don't know anything about it.
When you contacted Ethan Gutman, who's been looking at this topic for quite some time, how easy was it to convince him that you could tell this story coming in as somebody who was not familiar with it or the country that much?
We had a Skype conversation that lasted about an hour and a half one day, and I remember thinking he was the key. This was early on, we hadn't shot a thing, and it's such a complicated story, and it's got so many different facets to it. And so one of the things that I was interested in from a storytelling perspective is that we need to find some protagonists. And to me, Ethan would be one of the protagonists, basically, the John the Baptist wandering through the media wilderness saying, hey, that's what's going on. So it didn't take a lot to convince him, but he was skeptical at first because he said this is too complicated of a story to do in an hour. And I laughed and I said I could do it in 2 minutes if I had to, back in my old TV news days.
Yeah.
But I understood what he was saying. But we persuaded him that it's like, listen, we're taking this approach. And basically the approach was we break things into chapters and we find protagonists, heroes, people to follow for those 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes. And then we thread them together. And so Ethan, to me, was the important one in that he would be the most accessible to a public television audience. Public TV viewers, American viewers, know who he is. They don't know who Ethan is personally, but, oh, yeah, he's the cranky reporter who sort of works on the outside. He's a bit of a character. So they could identify with him. So it's like, this is such a strange and different and foreign topic, literally, that we needed someone like him that audience could go, oh, okay, I'll listen to him for a while. And then we start meeting people that Ethan had met along the way. The doctor from Western China, Dr. Enver Toji, and people just don't want to leave me alone. Sorry.
That's all right.
So Ethan had met Enver Tohti. He was a surgeon who actually did perform a live organ harvest transplant. And, of course, Ethan had met David Matas. He's the Canadian human rights lawyer. Ethan had also met Dr. Jacob Levy, who was this Israeli heart surgeon. So it was sort of like, so we were sort of following, in a sense, Ethan's book, trying to piece together the different parts of the story. Who are all these people involved in this? So that's it's a long way to answer the question. It didn't take Ethan too long to convince him that, yeah, we should do this. It took a little while for him to really be convinced that the way we were going to do it was going to work. But he was willing to work with us, and so we appreciated his leap of faith.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I imagine as a print reporter, he was looking at the depth of detail that he would normally go into when telling a story versus how you need to condense the story and how you substitute. And maybe I should ask this as a question. How do you go about then substituting images to show what somebody like Ethan Gutmann would have written into a whole chapter and then manage to fit that, the length of a book into a 56-minute story?
Right. And of course, Ethan is, the expression is old China hand. So he, tosses around leaders' names and dissidents' names from 20, 30 years ago, like I'm supposed to know who these people are and supposed to know all their backstories. And I'm supposed to know, I'm supposed to know because he knows he's such an expert in the field. You're right. He's an expert as much as one can be on the labor system in China, the labor camp system. There's no way that there's no real way we can match that, and we didn't try to. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I thought was important in the documentary is that we were not going to pretend to try to convince people, here's the smoking gun. We're going to prove that this really does happen. To me, that was not the story, and it's sort of like a fool's errand. Basically, we were just saying there is some really convincing, strong evidence that this is going on. And so even if we're not sure it is or not, how come no one's talking about it? To me, that was the interesting part of the story. It's not that, can you prove it or not? It's just like, why aren't we talking about it?
Yeah, it seems shocking enough that this ought to be front page news. What were some of the reasons that came out during the course of the conversations with Ethan that his investigation turned up that might explain why this is such a big secret? There are so many reasons, and probably one of the better ways to explain it is that there is a Congressional Executive Committee on China. It is a big thing in Washington. Very smart people involved. Every year they come out with a detailed, 500-page report on China, and it has to do with human rights in China and the economy in China and all the things that the United States government should be worried about and think about when engaging with China. And organ harvesting is mentioned briefly twice. And it's not because the people in Washington don't know that it's going on. It's that there's just such a long list of other things that people in Washington are really concerned about, that the plight of these political prisoners and what may be happening to them or not is just less important than all the other human rights and other issues that they have. Now, I'm not saying that that's the right judgment or not, but that's one of the reasons. I mean, the people in Washington who are paying attention to it are basically saying, yeah, we know there's that problem, and here's a stack of other problems. So that's one thing. Part of it is that the Falun Gong, which is the spiritual practice and it seems to be that most of these people, the majority of the people who had been rounded up, were Falun Gong practitioners, Falun Dafa practitioners, and it's a Buddhist spiritualist practice. It's not an organized religion by any stretch, but it's just really a practice that, because Americans don't know much about that spiritual practice, there's no empathy with those people. It's like, it seems to be some sort of strange thing that people are doing. Easy to apply the cult label to it.
And they're Asian people, and they're doing some sort of strange little Buddhist thing over there, and it's like, okay. And so there's no historical connection, and there's no emotional connection. So part of it is that the American public doesn't care because they just don't get it. They don't understand what the Falun Gong is, what Falun Dafa is. So the American public is engaged about, for instance, the people in Tibet, because through the Cold War many years ago, American public understood who the Tibetans were, understood what the problem was, and so the American public is concerned about the Tibetans, but not so much about people who are, engaging in this spiritual practice. Doesn't make logical sense, perhaps, but that's just the way that the history
human nature. Yeah.
And part of it is the media has not paid attention, and the media has not paid attention by and large, is because the American public has not paid attention, and the American politicians haven't paid attention. So if they're not paying attention, the media is not going to pay attention. And frankly, religious leaders in this country really haven't paid that much attention. And so, again, because each of these sectors are not paying attention, the media is not paying attention. So it's a chicken-egg thing.
Mm-hmm. And, of course, you got the economic interdependence of the United States and China, and we don't want to rock the boat because they hold so much of our debt. They supply so many of our cheap shoes and electronics. I wonder, as a newsman who's been through some radical changes in the way television and radio news has operated over the last 30 or 40 years, the internet has really changed things a lot. I got out of the business in the early 90s, came back in 2006 briefly, just long enough to see what had changed and to remember why I got out the first time. How much of the de-emphasis in news gathering is playing a role in this story not being told?
You mean because the news media is afraid to do stories on China because China is such a big economic giant?
That may be part of it, but I think more. I need to do a better job of focusing my questions. In recent years, we've seen newspapers struggling. People aren't reading newspapers as much as, and newsrooms have been cut. I saw personally on the local level, local radio news has been de-emphasized to the point where you've got one news person doing the job where they used to have a 6-person news staff.
Right. Well, until TMZ gets interested in the story, I'm not sure that it's ever. But that's part of it. It's like the American public, by and large, tends not to be interested in international news. This story gets way more play overseas. There's a lot more interest in this story in Germany and in England and in Canada because there is just an ethic that the populations in those countries pay attention to what's happening in the rest of the world. In the U.S., as you know, we pay attention sometimes, but by and large, we don't pay attention unless we think something directly affecting us.
Right.
Is and then we pay attention. Mm-hmm. So if it's obviously Afghanistan, Saddam Hussein, and Iraq, and that kind of thing, Lord knows, then the American media pays a ton of attention because the American public is paying attention to that.
Yeah.
But by and large, we don't pay attention to international events.
Right. So how difficult was it then to build a sense of connection between these political prisoners, the Falun Gong and the viewer, when you made the film?
Well, and so from a storyteller's perspective, that was one of the challenges. It's like so we told the story first of Ethan, and then we tell the story of Enver Tohti, who is this Uyghur surgeon, Western Chinese surgeon, who in the early 1990s did a organ transplant, and it seems to me he's in a sense Dr. Zero, that this was an early experiment, if you are to believe Enver Tohti's story, which I think it's hard not to believe that story. So we go from Enver, and then David Matus, who is a human rights lawyer in Canada, also sort of walks right out of central casting. He's like every human rights lawyer you've ever seen. He's small, he's shrunken, he won't stop. So we tell these people's stories, and then we got to Jacob Levy, who's this Israeli surgeon who had a heart patient walk into his office one day and say, "Doc, I got to tell you, I've been on the waiting list too long. My insurance company is sending me to China. I'm going to get a heart 2 weeks from Tuesday." And Dr. Levy was like, do you listen to yourself? He says, how can they guarantee you a heart 2 weeks from today? And the patient said, I don't know, I didn't ask. But at that point, then Levy starts investigating. Levy then stumbles upon Mattis's research. And then we then tell the story of Dr. Levy and what he did in Israel to change it so that Israeli citizens would not go to China. And he was successful in that. And what made it interesting, and then Ethan sort of ties it back and says, look at what Levy's been able to do in Israel, but countries elsewhere haven't done what they've done. And what Israel basically did, the Knesset, they refused to pay for any illegally procured organ. And so it just shut off Israeli citizens from going to China. Now, Israeli citizens could go to China if they want to, pay on their own dime.
Right.
But as Levy said, it seems that none of them has. And it has to do with the history of their country. They just, there's too much shame to do that.
Yeah.
And that's what drove Levy. So that was an interesting story. Levy, son of a Holocaust survivor. And he looked at it as if, no one stood outside the gates when my father was thrown into the labor camp. How can I not do something about what's happening to what I think these people in China? So you tell Levy's story. So it was through, so you keep on telling these different personal stories. It doesn't tell the complete story of what's going on, which is so complex. But it's like, wow, there's a doctor story about a doctor who did something. Oh, there's a human rights lawyer story who's trying to do something. Oh, there's the cranky journalist. Here's this really interesting, thoughtful doctor who's now in exile in England with one small personal story. So, little pieces of the jigsaw puzzle. And so we, 3/4 of the way through the piece, we finally meet a woman who is a Falun Gong practitioner, and her father, one of the earliest people to have been arrested in the crackdown on Falun Gong practitioners back in 1999. And so we told her story. Now, her story wasn't a story about organ harvesting, but it was a story about Falun Gong practitioners and what's happened to them. And, she's been trying to get her father out of China for a long, long time. And then we finally went to the medical community. There was a big conference in San Francisco, Transplantation Society. And so then we went there to talk about that story. And so we just wove different people into, this is when we were in California, we got a hold of a congressman, Dana Rohrabacher, right? And a very conservative Republican. But through him, we were able to tell the political story. He talks about it all the time, but because he's considered too far to the right, he's not paid attention to. And frankly, people way on the left are also not paid attention to. So it's this interesting dynamic that the mainstream does not want to engage with what these people want to engage with.
Yeah. This is a story that probably hits closer to home than a lot of Americans realize. I personally know two members of my extended family who have lost their lives because they couldn't get transplants quickly enough. One a heart, another kidneys. And I know in one case there were some thoughts of perhaps traveling to India for considering that as an option. And it obviously eventually decided against it. But it seems to me that this is a problem that wouldn't exist if there wasn't a demand for these organs. In the research that Gutman and pulled together, did he get any sense of how many of the recipients of these organs were Chinese versus Westerners?
No, that's of all the research that they've done, and the research they've done is pretty impressive. That is the slipperiest number. Again, it's, what are the telltale signs? And it's websites of these transplant hospitals, which are in English, and a lot of anecdotal stories. But are there numbers as to how many Americans or how many Westerners have gone to China to get transplants? It's you're left with estimates, and frankly, the Chinese government, keeps on saying, hey, this is all smoke and mirrors. you have no hard evidence. You have no hard numbers. And when it comes to that part of the story, you're right, they don't have any hard numbers.
Most of my broadcasting career was in music radio. Started out in radio news, but then learned that nobody needs a 19-year-old talk show host because you don't know anything. Got into talk radio.
Too much, one or the other. Yeah.
But got back into it in the second part of my career. But I saw enough of the news side to know that there are times when you have to bring to the public stories that are really distasteful and really unpleasant. As far as your career goes, how does this story rate compared to other things you've had to cover?
It was a difficult story in that it was so big, and there was a lot of fog, so that was difficult, and the subject itself is horrific. Make no mistake. I mean, it's some people talk about it being a Holocaust, but I'm not close enough to that Holocaust. I'm not close enough to the people who have lost their lives, family members who are grieving. They're all behind that curtain, right? Yeah. So there was a bit of horror, but it was, frankly, at a distance, because we shot most of this documentary in the U.S. We went to England for 4 days to do shooting there with Enver Tohti, who was the doctor. But by and large, we did everything from within the U.S. And part of that was because this is what we're able to do. And also, to have done the story that I wish we could have done would have been $2 million in 2 years, and much more international travel. And it was just a story that frankly, we didn't have the money to do and couldn't do. So it's like, so how can we get this story out with the time that we have and the amount of money that we had? And so this seemed the best way to do it. And because of that, I am absolutely a little bit removed from that horror, because I'm talking to a very nice Israeli doctor. I'm talking to a very sympathetic woman who wants her father back, but that's a little bit of a distance. Talking to an interesting attorney, interesting doctors, interesting journalists, talking to interesting politicians, but they're all domestic, and each one of them is a step removed from what could be the horror. So therefore, it wasn't difficult from an emotional point of view because I wasn't that close to it.
What was the most difficult aspect of the story, the most difficult thing that came to light as you talked with the various people involved? In terms of was it the scope of the story or the fact that...
it's one small moment. And it was Enver Tohti, who was the doctor. He's the Uyghur doctor. He was a surgeon. He was ordered to go to the execution grounds, and he did not know why. He was told, wait here. When you hear the gunshots, come around. And then it's like, this is the guy you're going to operate on. And so it's only when the guy is on the table, and this is literally outside, that he realizes the guy's alive still, because he had not been shot in the heart, but he had been shot not in the heart. And basically he was being ordered cut, and so that was a horrible story, and he told it to us in this very small flat that he has in London. And this was the moment that got me. And he goes, and at the end of the day, my chief surgeon said, Enver, remember, nothing happened today. And that line just sort of stuck with me, because obviously it stuck with Enver. Nothing happened today. And it was such a small detail that I think speaks to the horror of what we think's going on over there.
This film has obviously gathered some attention, 11 film awards. It's been broadcast more than 40 times on PBS here in the U.S. What sort of response, reaction have you gotten? Have you gotten any pushback from people who wished you hadn't told this story?
No, I haven't. And one of the things when I first got into this story is that some of the people I was talking to, and these are Falun Gong practitioners by and large, and not necessarily Chinese. The Falun Gong practitioners are American, Australian, English, the whole lot. They all talked about, well, I've had my email hacked, I've had my tires slashed occasionally, that kind of thing. So they said, so be prepared for some pushback or some difficulty. It hasn't happened to me, not yet, knock wood. But I believe these people in saying that they have been harassed in some manner, shape, or form.
What impact has this story made on you personally?
Well, for one thing, I was a little bit embarrassed that I didn't know about the story. I'm a news guy, and I've lived overseas, and I pay attention to international news. And, it's only when Irene called me up and told me, say, check this out. So I was a little sheepish and embarrassed that I didn't know anything about the story. So I was left with the feeling that, well, I should have known. And not should have known what exactly is the truth. Again, we don't know what the truth is, but I should have known that something's going on that's hard to believe. And it took me so long to find out.
Yeah, and again, that's why the film is aptly named, because when you hear about this and hear about the potential scope of the problem, it is hard to believe.
Yeah, and we got the title actually from one of the interviews. It was a human rights person in Washington, D.C., and I was asking her, well, why isn't this getting the attention of the human rights communities so much? And she was giving me the answers, and she said, well, in the allegations, she says, they're sort of hard to believe. And she wasn't saying that she didn't believe in them, but she was just saying, well, that's just, and so that's where the title came from. She was right. That's part of the reason why we haven't heard about it, because it's just a little bit too hard to believe. So we don't.
Yeah. Ken Stone is the director of the film Hard to Believe. There will be links in the show notes as to where you can find it and watch it. It's available for streaming at a number of online locations: Vimeo, iTunes, Amazon Instant Video, Google Play, and so forth. Ken Stone Media Services. Put a link to your website as well, sir. And
thank you.
Again, appreciate your time, and thank you for putting this story together and bringing this to the attention of the public. And hopefully we can help direct it.
I just wanted to say thank you for paying attention.
Well, it seems, again, as somebody who has a tendency to believe he's the smartest person in the room, which I should be old enough to know better by now, but, when I stumbled across Ethan Gutman's story and saw the interviews with him, I had the same reaction. How come I didn't know about this? So, Ken, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
Disturbing. If you want to look at the video versions of these interviews, both of these were recorded, Ken Stone and Kay Rubacek, the director and producer of Hard to Believe, via Skype video. So you can see their expressions and find those videos at the video version of the View from the Bunker podcast. We've kind of put the video version on hiatus for a short while, but that will eventually return when I have more time to edit video and actually produce a video version. Maybe we go to a live video. I don't know. But anyway, if you want to see Kay Rubacek and Ken Stone in the interviews, check out the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Derek Gilbert, youtube.com/Derek Gilbert, and then search for Kay Rubacek, Ken Stone, or just do a search for the film title, Hard to Believe. When we come back, we talk about the reason, the motivation that people will have to travel to the other side of the planet to receive a, say, a black market organ donation, organ transplant, the drive, the desire to extend human life at nearly all costs. That is the definition of the transhumanist movement taken to its extreme. It views radical life extension as our salvation. And we discuss it in an archived interview with Patrick Wood next on A View from the Bunker.
The victims of the human trafficking and sex trade industry have reached a boiling point around the world. But here in the United States, the demand has never been higher. Tragically, the massive growth of these unconscionable underground organizations is due in part to many citizens' disbelief that our modern society is capable of such atrocities, and live in a denial that these crimes are taking place here on our soil each and every day. SkyWatchTV and Whispering Ponies Ranch remain committed to providing ministry to the hurting, to the victims of abuses just like this and so much more. This is why we're proud to announce our new partnership with Yaku Buyans and 8 Days Ministry. In an effort to educate on these important topics and provide you with the tools needed to get engaged in the fight against sex trafficking, we present the 8 Days Special Collection. In this timely collection, you'll receive the cinematic movie inspired by actual events from director Yaku Buyans' 8 Days. This shocking presentation masterfully illustrates sequence by sequence how the victims of sex trafficking are often lured into entrapment, portrayed through the eyes of the lead characters. This incredible collection also includes the phenomenal book and companion workbook on disc, Woman of Influence, written by 8 Days screenwriter Philippa Buyans and lead actress Katie Walker. This 30-day devotional and companion workbook on disc is an inspiring, deeply affirming, and educational set that will encourage women to walk in the true identity of influence and purpose bestowed on them as daughters of the Most High God. But that's not all. You'll also receive on DVD the never-before-released, uncensored, off-the-record interview with the team behind the 8 Days movie, featuring Yaku and Philippa Buyans and actress Katie Walker as they disclose the hard-hitting realities of just how far the sex trafficking industry reaches, what the Trump administration has done to rescue thousands of victims, how the children of communities, including yours, may be at risk, and what you can do to fight back. Sold separately, this invaluable collection holds a retail value of $90. Yours now for your donation of only $35 plus shipping and handling. Sex trafficking is a difficult conversation, but ignoring it doesn't make it go away or help its victims. Understand this epidemic and learn how you can help by ordering the 8 Days Special Collection. Online now at the SkyWatch TV store or call 1-844-750-4985.
The belief that human salvation will come through science has become a new religion, a science fiction religion for the 21st century. And we've done a number of programs on that topic here on A View from the Bunker. It's one of the reasons we've partnered with SkyWatch TV. Tom Horn has been sounding that warning for many years. We agree. It is an alternate religion. The enemy, the principalities and powers that are our true enemy, according to the Apostle Paul, don't really care what we believe as long as it's not the one thing that's true. So if the New Age movement isn't enough to lure you away from the gospel of Jesus Christ, they'll go the other direction and appeal to your logic, reason, your love of science. And the transhumanist movement promises eternal life through technology. This is, make no mistake, a new religion. In 2013, we discussed this with a gentleman who's been, again, ahead of the curve on this for many, many years. He's the co-author of Trilaterals Over Washington, the author of a book which had not yet been published at the time we discussed it, called Technocracy Rising, a book we highly recommend. He's also the founder of RevelationGate Ministries. Patrick Wood, now, from the archives on A View from the Bunker.
So legend has it the devil used an apple to tempt Eve into believing the very first lie, ye shall be as gods. In our modern era, he may also use an apple, like the one I'm looking into at the moment, to get us to believe the same lie. Our guest is the editor of the August Forecast and Review, co-author of the book Trilaterals Over Washington, and the founder of RevelationGate Ministries. He speaks and writes often on the topics of technocracy and transhumanism. It's our honor and pleasure to welcome back to the bunker Patrick Wood. Pat, it's good to talk with you again.
Hey, good to be in the bunker, as you say.
Yes, the split level at the end of the cul-de-sac. We're hidden away from view.
Indeed.
Yeah. Wanted to start with a discussion of one area of expertise for you, which is the economy. This is a topic you write about quite often at the August Forecast and Review, and we are hearing in the news lately that things must be doing well because the Dow Jones Industrial Average is now at an all-time high, over 14,000 as of our recording this date. But then when we look at some other indicators, like John Williams' Shadow Stats website, we see that real unemployment
is close to 25%. That adult employment, the percentage of adult Americans in the workforce is dropping. How can both things be true?
Well, in 2006 and 7, everybody said that the real estate market was healthy and that it was going to go to the moon, and you couldn't possibly lose money in real estate. And the more you switch, the better. And you should put all your money in. And if you had $500, you could put a down payment on a house and borrow $300,000. And look what happened to them. There was plenty of people, by the way, that were warning that the real estate market was in jeopardy, and it was on the precipice of a huge collapse. Nobody listened. And the same thing is happening now with the stock market. And I point back to the bubbles of recent history. You had the dot-com bubble in the year 2000, where cheap money had been poured into the system by the Federal Reserve. That was Alan Greenspan at the time. And the dot-com industry, the tech bubble, took off like there was no tomorrow. People were bidding stuff up like crazy, and all of a sudden the whole market gave way and collapsed. The second bubble we had was, because of the cheap money, was a real estate market. And we've already been through that. Don't need to talk about that again. And now another bubble is manifesting itself with stocks. And there's absolutely no fundamental reason for stocks to be where they are, other than the fact that the Fed has put a tsunami of financial liquidity into the banking system, into the hedge fund system, which of course is closely aligned with the banking system, and these groups are putting money into stocks. I guess maybe they have no other place to put the money, probably, but they're putting money into stocks. It's becoming the third bubble in this overall bear market that really started in the year 2000. So it's not going to last. There's no way. As you said, the underlying fundamentals are absolutely insane, including unemployment, by the way. Mm-hmm. So that's my take.
Over the last couple of years, as an outside sales rep for a company that deals in structural steel, I've learned more about economics than I did when I was getting my undergraduate degree in econ. Just by going out and talking to guys who run businesses or manage businesses that are basically make things from raw materials. We're a little bit unusual in Southern Illinois in that we've got a healthy and developing oil industry, natural gas industry here because of fracking. But that is kind of driving some business here that may not that other states may not be able to benefit from. But as you say, the fundamentals, at least from the people that I talk to, and I know it's anecdotal evidence, would seem to indicate that there's not much correlation between the performance of the stock market and how real people live. Would you agree with that?
Well, I do, and there has been a almost a dual economy economic system running in America and really throughout the world. There's the economy that exists for the global corporations and the global banking system, and then there's the economy for everyone else. That's the mom and pop businesses, the stores down on the corner, the small businesses that make up the backbone of America. The top flight economy is doing much better than the bottom part of it, and you can go and talk to anybody on the street and ask them, well, have you gotten a hold of any of that money that was put in, that the Fed put in and went to all the banks and stuff? And they'll tell you, no way. There ain't no money coming to me. My bank won't loan me money. I'm scrapping to just, keep my doors open. And, consumers aren't buying stuff like they used to. And I may or may not be in business a year from now. That's the story on the street. You talk to somebody, on the other hand, like a Hewlett-Packard or a Dell or a Siemens or, J.P. Morgan Chase or whoever, and they'll tell you business is great, never been better, record profits, blah, blah, blah. And you shake your head and you go, what? Well, this is exactly what's happened. We've got a lower base economy that's doing very poorly. We've got the international global community that is almost taken on a life of its own. And by the way, that is where the bubble exists. The bubble doesn't exist down here on Main Street. The bubble exists with these, with these other global companies. And they don't maybe know how close they are to collapse, but I think it's going to be coming in 2013.
Well, that was my next question. How does this upper level or high level economy sustain itself when basically what they're doing is just trading baseball cards back and forth? These financial instruments that have no that are completely untethered from reality. I mean, there's no brick and mortar base for what's driving the profits at places like J.P. Morgan Chase or Citicorp or Bank of America, which, by the way, I saw an article recently that said, the amount of money declared as profit by the major banks for 2012 almost exactly correlates with the amount of bailout money they received from the United States government or United States taxpayer, excuse me.
Yes, that's correct. That's right. And that's just about the That's about the story too, because if the Fed had not injected money into these banks, they all would have gone bankrupt. I can just tell you they had to replace their capital, and the only way they could do it is to get the money from the Fed, and it's worked out very well for them because they're still in business, and they have been able to replenish their capital, but not with profits, not with their own profits. They've received the subsidy from the government. And that's kept them alive for the last 3 or 4 years.
So you say 2013 is a crunch time. What do you see taking place this year?
Well, I think that the economy is as I said, the lower 80% of economies not doing very well at all. But we have to remember that if you go back and study history, especially the period from 1929 and into up to 1935, history is replaying itself right now. It's scary. How much it's replaying itself right now. And Europe now is in outright recession. And you've got Germany, especially, which has been kind of the stalwart of growth for some years. Even Germany now is headed down. You've got several countries in the Eurozone that have 25-30% employment, and several countries are in just outright steep recession right now. This is how the collapse started in 1929, 1930, coming out of Europe, especially Germany. And as that crisis radiated throughout the world, the rest of the world collapsed. The financial systems collapsed and stuff. And we're headed on that same track again right now. Everybody's looking at the Fed. Everybody's looking at what's happening in the U.S. stock market. But we need to keep our eyes on Europe right now as much as anything, because Europe is leading the way. And, you look at some of the stories coming out of Greece, out of Italy, out of Spain, out of Portugal, out of Great Britain, and you go, is this the same planet? Are we talking about the same planet that we live on? And people aren't watching Europe. We need to, but what's happening there is going to spread here, and it's going to take the whole system down in time. And our own economy is not doing that well. I mean, in the fourth quarter of last year, initially reported it was actually contracted by 0.1%. Then they revised it upward to 0.1%. But let me tell you, 0.1% is nothing. That's greater than the statistical, or less than the statistical error that might exist. So there's no growth going on in America right now. And, everything is still pointed to contraction. The lower class, the middle class is shrinking. The lower class is growing. People on food stamps are coming in at 11,800 people a day for new claims. And they talk about unemployment, being, so much better right now. Well, I'll tell you what, 340,000 people filing for new claims ain't a whole lot better than 300 and, whatever. They're straining over a gnat, swallowing a camel, and it's still bad. We're nowhere close to sustained growth. It's just not there. There's not one economic indicator you can point to right now and say, "Yep, that's in a trend. That's going up." and here's all the fundamental reasons why it's going up. There's not one area in the economy you can point to and do that right now.
No, it's a classic case of what my dad used to call, what was the saying he used to use? Figures don't lie, but liars can figure.
That's right.
And
that's exactly right.
Yeah, and we've mentioned the website shadowstats.com many times on the program, and John Williams, who calculates the unemployment rate based on the way it was calculated prior to the first Bush administration when they started changing the formula, is showing unemployment at about 23% right now. And going up, whereas the official government statistics, even the U6, which is the number that includes discouraged workers, people who've given up looking for, after a year, is trending downward. And it's going in the opposite direction it has for the last 2 years from the Shadow Stats alternate, which used to be the United States government official means of calculating unemployment.
Yes. We have lost, in the last several years, we have lost 8.5 million jobs permanently. They're never coming back. These are jobs that were transferred overseas. They're now in China. They're now in India. They're now in Mexico or wherever. And those jobs are never coming back. Those are the manufacturing jobs that really built the middle class in our country, and they're never coming back. People have moved in, from $25, $30 an hour jobs into flipping hamburgers down at McDonald's or something for minimum wage. That's not progress, I hate to say. He said, well, but he's got a job. I say, yeah, he's got a job. Let's talk about the quality of the job he's got now. A guy may have put 30 years into a career to get to the point where he can make $30 an hour. All of a sudden, his industry's gone. He's back on the street, has no marketable skills, goes to work for some company just to try and put some food on the table, and he ends up making $10 an hour, and you've got to be happy with it. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, it's ridiculous. Well, these jobs aren't ever coming back, is my point.
You talk about the parallels between 2013 and 1929, 1930. How did the central banks and governments of the world during this financial crisis, which started about 2008, how did they respond compared to how governments responded in 1929, 1930?
Well, they tried to pump the system as full of money as they could to save everybody's keister. They lost control of it eventually, and when the Fed finally realized what was going, that they couldn't control it anymore, that deflation was going to set in whether they liked it or not, they changed tact and they actually dried up the money supply. That is the free credit available to investors and people like in the stock market with margin accounts and stuff that pay interest to borrow money. They actually dried up the money that was available in the stock market, precipitated a crash. The people that made great fortunes off that crash were the people who sold short at the top. Mm-hmm. and I you can go back and look at that. There's a few books that came out around that period of time. One I remember from my early days called The Plungers and the Peacocks, and these people made fortunes as they shorted stock at the top because they knew it was going to go down. They knew what the policy was in place, that was just going to absolutely destroy the stock market, and it did. And as deflation set in back then, it set in force economic trends that lasted 10 years. Very difficult for America to get out. If it wasn't for World War II, we probably could still be in trouble. But you've got the same kind of deflationary scenario is here right now. The Fed cannot control it anymore. That's their greatest fear, that deflation will take place. And that's why they've been putting money back in recklessly, trying to save everything. And once they figure they've lost the battle with deflation, there's no doubt in my mind they're going to pull their finger out of the dike and just let the dike blow.
Who benefits from this policy then of trying to pump up the system and just push liquidity into the markets? Are they trying to restart the economy on Main Street, or is there some other plan at work here?
No, there's no effort to restart Main Street that I can see. Every plan that the president has or Congress, said that we should do, everybody gives lip service to it, and then you wait for something to happen down here on Main Street, and it never happens. But what does that tell you? It's just lip service. It's not happening. So they can talk about it all they want, and they can promise us that, we're really gonna jumpstart. They don't give a rip. They don't care about the people on the street down here. I heard somebody mention to me a great concept. When somebody drops out of the labor force because they can't get a job and they just give up, and it's expensive to look for a job.
Yeah.
You got to copy your resume. You got to spend gas to go out and meet with people. You don't do that in a vacuum. If you don't have any money and you're unemployed, there comes a point where you say, I ain't doing this anymore. I'm not going to take myself down to zero or start borrowing money, put myself in the hole looking for a job. I just give up and stay home. Well, these people are out looking for a job. When they give up and stay home and they fall off the employment roll because they're not counted in the the unemployment rate, the government basically turns them into invisible people. They just ignore them. They don't acknowledge them in any way. They don't talk about them in any way. And there's 8 to 9 million people like that in America right now that have dropped off the rolls, and they're just sitting out there. And it's just like they ignore the people that have been aborted over the last 40 years. Mm-hmm. Some 55 million babies have been aborted. They ignore them as if they were never there. And this is really scary. I mean, this tells you what the attitude of the elite is towards the people, the populace of this country, and for that matter, any other country in the world is about the same thing. It's crazy. Yeah. Absolutely crazy.
And that's how you can look at a chart like the one at shadowstats.com and see that the official unemployment rate is going down when, in fact, the reality, which the people I talk to on Main Street can see with their own eyes, is going in the other direction.
They're just dropping out. That's right. People just drop out. They drop out of looking for work, and the government tosses them out of the statistic.
Where does that leave us as Christians then looking forward? How do we prepare? How do we deal with this information? I mean, it's really easy to kind of absorb this and just get really depressed, and give into a tendency or a temptation to just sort of hole up inside the bunker and try to let the world go its own way. How do we deal with this?
We know the extent to which a Christian can be depressed about this reveals the extent to what they have at least one foot in the world. Because, if you're really disappointed by what's being taken away from you, that's where your treasure is. And the Bible pretty clearly says where your treasure is, there will be your heart also.
Well said.
So, to a Christian, I say, beware, because if you grouse too much about what you're losing or what you could lose, then that just shows that your affinity for the world is way beyond what it should be. And that's a warning to Christians to put their hope and their treasure where it belongs, in heaven, not on earth. And we do live in exciting times. There's no doubt about it. These are, I think, biblically speaking, I think these are the most exciting times to live on planet Earth ever. For a number of reasons, but I think ever. And, we should be watching what's going on. We should be wise in understanding the signs of the times. I just call it like I sees it, and some people don't like it, but I just, that's my opinion. You don't have to agree with me, nor do you have to react in the way I think you should react. But for a Christian, I think it's time for them to wake up and get their nose back into their Bible, get their nose back into the kingdom of heaven rather than into the kingdom of the world, and understand what God has for his church and for his people now and in the future. That's where it's at for a Christian.
Shifting gears a little bit and looking at the future now, you have been writing and speaking about the role that technocrats are playing in the governments of the world, and that this is not a new movement. This is kind of eye-opening, and your work specifically on what these new smart meters represent. The Wi-Fi enabled smart meters that the gas company is going around putting on all over, and the electric companies are putting on our homes all over the country. What this actually represents, and the direction that things are heading. Talk a little bit about that. As Christians looking forward with an eye on the book of Revelation and prophecy and where things are leading. What role does technocracy play in fulfilling the coming one world government?
Well, technocracy is a manifestation of a philosophy that was started really in earnest in the late 1800s. And that initial philosophy was called positivism. it morphed into another ism called scientism, which is probably more closely or easily identified with technocracy and with transhumanism. But scientism, as an extension of positivism, is based on a mixture of pseudoscience and empirical science that states that science alone is the only source of truth about the nature of man, the physical world, and universal reality. And so scientism has become a religion, if you will, that excludes God and that makes a statement that the only way to understand reality and the nature of man is through science. And when science originally, back in the late 1800s, when science met social engineering, if you will, or what we now know as sociology, when empirical science got a hold of society, they made the claim, still in force today, they made the claim that society obeys rules of law in the same way that the physical sciences respond to the laws of like physics and chemistry and so on, and that therefore society and mankind can be measured, can be tabulated, can be controlled and manipulated according to fixed laws. And this is where science got mixed up with sociology, with social control and all these things. It immediately turned into a political philosophy that we know as the progressive movement. And through the early 1900s and so on, the progressive movement, as it was called, affected all areas of society, from politics to universities to economics and so on. And we now, even today, we see the progressive movement still moving forward. But this philosophy, with scientism kind of at its core, has produced two stepchildren, if you will. It's two children. One is technocracy, which is a form of economic and political control. The other is transhumanism, which pretends to control the evolution of mankind. All involved with science, using science to control the economy or politics, and using science through transhumanism to control the future of man, to create a race of post-humans. It's all related. It all started back in earnest in the late 1800s, and we can trace it now very clearly through the early 1900s, through the various political movements, through the Technocracy Inc. movement, for instance, in the early 1930s, through the modern transhuman movement. We see this all dovetailing together from the same error, the same philosophical error that was made back in the 1800s, and it's asserting itself now. That's why we're concerned. It's making an assertion on mankind, on all of the political realm, the economic realm, and in the personal realm through transhumanism. As it asserts itself, Christians need to have a response. To date, they have had virtually no response to this. They don't understand what's going on. They can't grasp the magnitude of it. They don't see how fast it's coming. They don't see how important it is to the Christian faith to make an answer for the hope that lies within us, to counter these other arguments and stuff that are sweeping the world. And transhumanism, for instance, today is the fastest growing movement, quasi-religious movement, that the world has ever seen. It's sweeping the continents, just absolutely amazing. And you go and do a search on the word transhumanism, you will find thousands and thousands and thousands of references now of people talking about it all over the world.
We're talking with Patrick Wood on A View from the Bunker. He is the editor of the August Forecast and Review. You find it online at augustforecast.com. He's also the founder of RevelationGate Ministries, which is online at revelationgate.com. We'll put links to those in the show notes. So transhumanism as a belief system almost sounds like science fiction. What is it about this movement that has convinced you that this is a threat that Christians need to take seriously?
Well, it does sound a little bit like science fiction, and I would say that many of these transhumanists have read way too much science fiction and watched way too many movies that they think they can somehow, almost using magic, make this stuff happen. My view of their future is very dim at this point. I think they're going to be very disappointed in the end when they find out that they cannot do even half of what they say they can do. But the idea of transhumanism, kind of putting science on the side right now, is that transhumanism has taken an ugly turn where it is pitting itself against God directly by attempting to produce a race of godlike post-humans that will have qualities like immortality, being able to live forever, omniscience, understanding all knowledge, omnipresence, meaning they can go anywhere or be in multiple places at the same time. These are characteristics that are reserved for God and God alone.
Yeah.
These are the qualities that make God who he is. And so when transhumanism pits itself directly against the characteristics and the character of God, as Christians, you have trouble on your hands. It's just like when Christians first started to figure out what Charles Darwin was all about, and his attack on Genesis, and his attack on how the world was created. No, it evolved. It wasn't just created by a God, whatever. Once Christians figured that out, they said, "We got trouble here, friends. We got the biggest argument of the century coming on us," and indeed they did. And so, when transhumans say openly and publicly that they are now, and these are the scientists that are involved doing this stuff, when they say that they are going to take control of evolution, of the evolutionary process, and they're going to use science to hijack evolution, if you will, in order to control the future of humanity. Okay? Mm-hmm. They're taking over evolution. They're going to use science and engineering to do it. They're going to control the evolution of mankind in a way that suits them and them alone, not you, not me. They're not asking you and me, what do you want to be like, 50 years from now? They're just saying, nope, we're taking it over. We will make decisions, on how mankind is going to look 50 or 100 years from now. And, this pits them against the God of heaven. And, of course, that's a battle that's been going on since the garden. And you mentioned the garden at the start of the show, by the way. Mm-hmm. Eve was promised secret knowledge. She said, God, the devil said, God knows stuff you don't know. And if you eat this fruit, well, you can know that. Your eyes will be open. You can know that truth, and you can be like God. And then he said to her, and by the way, you surely will not die. Mm-hmm. This is the same lie, exactly the same lie. There's secret knowledge out there that these scientists are trying to learn on how they can outsmart God to become immortal, omniscient, and omnipotent. And, they're going to use science to do it. This is turning into be a flat-out religion that's pitted against the God of heaven. Christians need to be concerned about this.
Now, we try to explain it to friends, even Christian friends, some who are pastors even. We'll start down this discussion, and I can see eyes beginning to glaze very early in the conversation. Maybe it's the way I explain it. My dad used to say, if you ask Derek the time, he'll tell you how to build a watch. So maybe that's the problem. Or maybe the problem is people think about technology in their own homes. And it's like, look, I've got this VCR that's been blinking 12, 12, 12, 12, 12, for years. And, I can't get it to program properly. How am I supposed to believe that these guys are actually going to take us down a path where they believe they can transcend the law of sin and death?
Well, here's the thing, Derek. Number one, I believe that this is the deception that Satan is putting on the world, not the reality. Satan is a deceiver. The Bible's very clear about that. That's what he does. He's a liar from the beginning. He's a murderer, and he's a deceiver. He has no reality in himself whatsoever. He can't create reality, and he isn't reality. But he can deceive people, and he does. And mankind is being deceived by this whole area of transhumanism and technocracy and stuff, that science can produce a better future than God can. And so people are racing down this path, believing that they can pull it off. And I think they're going to find out in the end they never could pull it off. They were deceived by the devil in the first place. It was all a big hoax. So on one hand, I believe that these scientists are deceived into thinking that they can do what they say they're going to do. But more importantly, for the Christian world, the church needs to understand, and they see it, they need to understand why 80 to 90% of the young people are leaving the church by the time they're 18. They don't get it. You look at the gray hair in the existing churches left in America today, and you'll scratch your head. Where are the young people?
Yeah.
The young people are exiting in droves because the church has no answer for them. They're getting steeped in this transhuman deception. They're getting steeped in the scientism deception. They're falling for it hook, line, and sinker, and it's taking them directly away from Christianity and from the God of the Bible. And this is what I say to pastors. Sir, you may not understand it, what I'm saying here, but you need to suck it up and force yourself to understand it. And what you can't understand, you need to ask God to give you wisdom on this so you can have an answer for those people who are exiting out stage left out of your fellowship.
Again, one of the obstacles I think that I've encountered in trying to explain this to people is the perception that this is just a radical fringe at the university, at our universities, that's behind this movement. How powerful are the forces that are pushing this transhumanist movement?
Incredibly powerful. It's sweeping the nation or the world. There's a great documentary on the internet. You can find it on Google or iTunes or whatever, called Technocracy. And it's a documentary made by a guy who wasn't necessarily for or against it. Made it in Europe. I think it was the Netherlands, but it's in English. It'll open your eyes as to this movement and how powerful and sweeping it is across the planet today. As atheism has crept in, or I should say as atheism has pushed God out of governments and society, people are looking for answers. They don't want to die. They don't want to be corrupted and whatever. And if they have a sense that there is a judgment after death, they don't want anything to do with it. You remember Hugo Chavez died recently. Mm-hmm. His last words were reported to be, and they call him a courageous man in the same sentence. He was such a courageous man. His last words that came out of his mouth were, "Please don't let me die." Mm-hmm. Okay. What's on Hugo Chavez's mind? Is it, nationalize the oil companies, build a statue to me or whatever? No, it's please don't let me die. He was reduced to, a whimpering pile of goo before he died. The only thing was on his mind, I don't want to die. Mm-hmm. Please don't let me die. He was begging for his life. And he's gone now, just like everybody else. That comes to the end of their life, he's gone. And you may fear it, but you're going there one way or another.
That's right. And Mr. Chavez is much better informed about the nature of the universe now, or the cosmos, than he was just a week ago. Many Christians have managed to synthesize a personal belief system that incorporates a belief in evolution of some sort with their professed belief in Jesus Christ and the God of the Bible, whether it's sort of an evolutionary creation or, God is sort of the cosmic watchmaker. He sort of wound it up and is now letting it run its course. How does that fit into the discussion between the Christian worldview and the technocratic or transhumanist worldview?
Well, when a church or an individual adopts a position of theistic, what I call theistic evolution, mm-hmm. which says that, God was in control of the process, but it took millions or billions of years to create the earth and so on. The transhumanists and the scientism people have won. They flat out won. They have compromised. They have caused a person to compromise his belief in the Bible, and a very fundamental belief that God created the world as He said He did. And if man existed before the Garden of Eden, then the entire plan of salvation has been destroyed, because it started with Adam. When Adam fell, Jesus is called the second Adam. He's the one that redeemed the Adamic race. And if evolution existed before that, then the whole business about the cross, about His shedding His blood for the sins of man, it all means nothing. It's impossible. It can't. It's not logical at all if theistic evolution is true. I believe it's not, but a lot of Christian churches have adopted that to try and keep their young people in. Well, it's absolutely insane. They're giving them more of the same medicine that they're getting in the world, by saying, well, we don't want our young people to leave, so we just won't make that an issue. We'll say we'll give some room to say, well, yeah, God could have done it in 6 billion years instead of 6 days. So transhumans, scientism people win when churches adopt that position, and the rest of their hermeneutical understanding of history and of the Scripture will fall apart in time, completely fall apart when they take out that cornerstone of the Bible.
Recently read a paper by a professor of, and I can't remember now off the top of my head if it was psychology or sociology, who encouraged the transhumanist movement, those within it, to study the writings of the late Jesuit priest Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who wrote in the first half of the 20th century. He was an archaeologist of some note, was involved in the discoveries of Peking Man, and kind of on the sidelines, tangentially connected to the Piltdown Man discovery, which was later proved to be a hoax. He believed in evolution and tried to synthesize a belief system that incorporated Jesus and evolution. Mm-hmm. And this transhumanist is suggesting that the movement, his transhumanist movement, study his writings and use the arguments put forward by Teilhard to build bridges to liberal branches of Christianity and draw them into the transhumanist movement so as to overcome any objection that Christians in the West, especially, where he believes we might still pose an obstacle to transhumanism, would be overcome. What are your thoughts on that? Is that something that might take place? Do you see it taking place now? Is there such a thing as a Christian transhumanist movement?
Well, there is, and it's neither Christian nor perhaps pure transhumanism, but many different religions are buying into the transhuman idea. I'll give you an example. A year and a half ago, there was a meeting of the World Transhumanist Association in Salt Lake City, of all places. About 100 people came from around the world, representing various religions of the world, from like Buddhists and Hindus and so on. Even I think there's even an Islamic representative there, and this meeting was sponsored by the Mormon Transhuman Association. You say, what? Mm-hmm. The Mormon Transhuman Association? Oh, well, I'm not going to comment on that anymore. I don't want to open that can of worms. But you find different supposedly Christian groups. At least they call themselves Christian groups, that are buying into transhumanism because it promises to, if you will, to bring the kingdom of God to earth and improve it through science. And I've even heard some Christian apologists say that God is revealing scientific truth to His people so that they can create a better world that Jesus can come back to. This is dangerous thinking, needless to say. But, because it's a slippery slope. Once you start on it, you end up in places that you really didn't want to go.
Yeah, and Telliard writes that the ultimate goal of the movement is to become one with the cosmos, what he calls the Omega point, which is very similar to what Raymond Kurzweil would call the singularity.
Yes, exactly.
To become one with the cosmos, one with God, in other words.
Yes.
And the transhumanists, or at least this particular transhumanist, suggests that that might be an appealing argument to Christians and say, if your goal is to become one with God, then why shouldn't you do everything in your power, use every technological means at your disposal to achieve that goal? Yes, it's interesting that you'll find Desjardins and people, other Catholic clerics like St. Augustine. It's interesting that you'll find these people often quoted in emergent church literature today, and some of the philosophical writings of these people appeal to what used to be pretty much evangelical Christians, but now the emerging church doctrines have taken a large part of Christianity in a different direction, bringing in some of the philosophies that resulted in these people's really, what I would consider really crackpot ideas in the end. And of course, they were driven by philosophy in the first place. They didn't come up with this. He didn't come up with this idea of a noosphere out of the blue. It was according to, the philosophy he started with that made it possible for him to conceive it. It's pretty crazy. But we find writings of people like this, all over the face of modern Christianity, especially when those that are following the emerging church thinking. Shifting back toward to a look at the emerging one world government through the work of the technocrats. How is the technocratic movement manifesting itself today? What do we see in our everyday lives that gives evidence of this drive to use science as a means of control? Well, sure. If you were to draw a triangle in front of yourself right now and label the three sides of the triangle, transhumanism, technocracy, and scientific dictatorship, you'd have yourself a good model of where scientism is taking the world as a whole. Transhumanism represents a religious component of that, which we've just been talking about. Technocracy really represents the economic equation or part of society. And scientific dictatorship is the ultimate government structure that we're headed towards. And we see elements of this all around us. If we were to talk about scientific dictatorship very far, about what's going on in society right now, moving the world towards a police state, taking away personal freedoms and liberty and so on, controlling people by science and computers. I mean, think Obamacare, for Pete's sake. Once everybody's health records are in Obamacare, the old philosophers from Adolf Hitler's day are going to get into that database and just start having a ball separating out the genetic stock that needs to be eliminated. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like, oh my gosh. But if you look at technocracy and its a desire to control people economically, well, you can look at the whole smart grid issue where the energy companies are creating a global smart grid to control the energy that flows to every household on the planet. And you say, this is, people challenge me on this. I say, look, I'll take you to the organizations that are building this stuff right today, and they're building a global smart grid that will control energy down to the appliance level and people's homes all around the world. They will be in a position to distribute energy to continents, to divert it from one continent to another, one region to another, one block to another, one state to another, as they see fit. And they will be able to control society by controlling the power, by controlling the energy, the natural gas as well, by controlling the distribution of water. This is going into place right now. This is what technocracy designed and put down on paper back in the 1930s. Smart grid is now a reality. It's almost a reality 100% across America. And it's also been implemented in every other industrial country in the world. All of Europe,
China, Mexico, Africa, India. It's like, we whine over our smart meters here in America, not even understanding that the rest of the world had no resistance to it whatsoever, and it's already done. It's a done deal.
We had a bit of a taste of that in a home that we were renting back in Indiana several years ago. The hottest days of summer, suddenly we noticed, hey, it's 82 degrees here in the house. It's about 15 degrees higher than where we would like it, especially at night to try to sleep. And it turned out that a smart meter had been put on the home at the request of the homeowner because it got him a discount on his rate when he lived there. And this is being sold to us as somehow necessary, isn't it? I mean, isn't this what the whole climate change agenda is about?
Well, it is. And, again, that's a science-based initiative built to push technocracy and scientific dictatorship, for that matter. But it's all science-based. It's bad science, admittedly. But in the proponent's mind, it's good science, and therefore you need to obey their science. And if you obey their science, they would have you riding a bicycle to work no matter where you worked. They would have you living in a condo over, some shopping mall somewhere. And, they'd have you, walking, if you weren't riding your bike, walking everywhere, saving as much energy as you can to reduce your carbon footprint. And they'd put you in a little box. So, it's all, and in the end of it, it's all about you doing what they claim that you should do. They come up with all the sustainable development stuff. Agenda 21 has come up from the United Nations, is being imposed all around the world right now. And you look at all the stuff they want you to do, and you say, wait a minute, how can they have this whole prescription for me as a human? They don't even know me. Well, they don't need to know you. Their science tells them that if society doesn't do this, that somehow the world's going to destroy itself. Therefore, they go out and get into positions of power to force you to do what they want you to do. Mm-hmm. It's you can't fight it after a while. I mean, they're hauling people away to jail in handcuffs for refusing to let the utility company put the meter on the side of the house.
And justifying it, but through key members of the media who write columns about how climate change deniers, are a threat to humanity, or perhaps psychologically imbalanced and in need of incarceration.
Well, yeah.
Your ministry, RevelationGate Ministries. This was a relatively new development, as we've kind of followed your work from afar for a number of years, Patrick. What was it, the genesis of RevelationGate Ministries?
Good one. I'm not gonna quite fall into that, but it's tempting.
The alpha of the omega. There, yeah.
I've been asking the question for a long time. Is there a vaccine, if you will, or an antidote for deception in the church today? And I believe that the church is being greatly deceived by much of this information. I'm very disturbed about it. I won't go into everything, but I believe that what the Bible predicts is a great apostasy in the last days. I believe that's occurring right now, and I'm very concerned about it. And so I've been asking the question and talking to people for years now. What is the vaccine, if you will, to keep Christians from backsliding away from the faith that they've had, many of them, all their lives? And if they're involved in aberrant theology and they're going off in the wrong direction, is there a cure to bring them back, to get them back where they need to be again? And what I've determined over a period of years that there, in fact, is a part of Christian doctrine that's been ripped away that has made possible the deception. Now, Satan's not stupid about this. I've just tried to figure it out, and maybe God give me some wisdom along the way. But what has been removed from the practical Christian doctrine that allows these deceptions to take place in the church is a clear and cogent doctrine of heaven. That is a future things, not just what's going to happen in Bible prophecy, but the book of Revelation has been excluded from discussion, from teaching, the blessings that are contained therein, the things that are revealed about Jesus that are only in this book, have been ripped away from the mainline church, the evangelical church, and they won't talk about it anymore. And this is what has allowed, I believe, these deceptions to come in. And if you look through the New Testament, you will find the apostles, especially Paul, constantly talking about heaven, talking about where Jesus is. He says, put your trust in heaven. Fix your eyes on the author and finisher of your faith. Comfort each other with these words, for the end. The end. The time is near. You find this theme all the way through the New Testament. But if you don't go into the book of Revelation today, 2,000 years later, and understand what they were writing about, you'll never see it. You'll never really grasp what he meant when he said those things. This is what set him on fire to take the gospel to the world. And this is what Christians are missing today, I'm afraid. And this was the reason that I started RevelationGate Ministries, was to present the book of Revelation, to present the unveiling of Jesus Christ as he is in the book of Revelation, and also to explain why it matters, why it's important to know these things. So that's kind of what I'm working on this on. It's a work in progress, still working on it. But, I'm hoping if the Lord gives us a little bit of time here to do this, that I might have something, for Christians to chew on that will take them back to where they might have been 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago in their faith, and get excited about being a Christian again because of the kingdom of heaven and not because of the kingdom of the world. And, sad to say, all of the social movements in Christianity that are going on today to, like what Bono has, to eradicate poverty and disease in Africa and all this stuff. Those are terribly good works on one hand, but Jesus did not. The Bible does not call us to eradicate AIDS in Africa. I'm sorry. Should we go there and minister to people? Yes. But should we make a program out of it to the exclusion of the kingdom of heaven? No. Christianity is upside down, and it's getting more upside down as we go. Somewhere along the way, a few people got to stand up at least and say, look, guys, get your foot out of the world or you're going to get burned.
That's really, I think, insightful observation that all of these aberrant teachings within and without the church, the theistic evolution and where it ultimately leads, Desjardins' Omega point, the transhumanists with their singularity, the technocrats with their belief that they can create heaven on earth through their own works, the New Age movement. Essentially, they are missing the book of Revelation, and Christians who are buying into it have basically eliminated the book of Revelation and also the book of Genesis, at least the first few chapters where, God created heaven and earth and, created, man and woman and so forth. It's like, slice the ends off so we can make it fit into our own self-defined theology.
That's right. Satan's not stupid about this. He knows that if you can take away the first and the last chapter of the most important book in history, you're left with no ability to understand the book at all. How can you? If you bought a novel at the store, just some novel you're going to read, and you got it home and opened up and found out that the first and last chapters had been removed from the book, you wouldn't even bother to read the book. Mm-hmm. You say, why would I want to read this book? I don't have the first chapter to know how it started, and I don't have the last chapter to know how it ends. It's like, but this, Satan is really smart about this. He destroyed the book of Genesis through Darwinism and confused the church all over the place. And now he's used a different tactic to deny the church access to the book of Revelation by making most Christians so scared that they don't want to go near it, or so confused. I can't understand all the symbology and blah blah blah. So why even bother? They're scared away from the book of Revelation. They're intellectually led away from the book of Genesis, and they're left with all these books in the middle of the Bible, scratching their head, wondering, how does this really apply to my life? Mm-hmm. I can't really get the big picture here.
What you're left with is Jesus as a life coach.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. You got yourself a peanut butter and jelly sandwich without the bread.
Patrick Wood is the editor of the August Forecast and Review, augustforecast.com. RevelationGate Ministries online at revelationgate.com. Links in the show notes there. I'll also put a link to the documentary that he referred to, Technocracy. Those will be in the show notes at vftb.net. Pat, always a stimulating and educational conversation when we talk. We'll have to do it again much sooner next time.
That's fantastic. I appreciate your time and your effort for putting the program on, and thank you for having me on.
Highly recommend the work of Patrick Wood, and especially his book, Technocracy Rising. He not only identifies the problem of technocracy, the goals of technocracy, and does so with a lot of documentation. So you can see that this is a well-researched and a book that is based on evidence. He approaches this from a Christian perspective, and he ties it to end times prophecy and shows why technocracy is something that we should be paying attention to, and it has not gotten enough attention here among Christians. But not only is it technocracy a critical component of what will be the fulfillment of end times prophecy, it goes hand in hand with transhumanism, this desire to extend human life at nearly all costs. I hope you found this archive broadcast educational and informative, if a bit disturbing. But that's why we do what we do here, to try to bring to the body of Christ information that just isn't coming from anywhere else. To that end, we'll be out and traveling throughout the course of 2019, and we hope we can see you at one of these locations. Certainly the Defender Conference in Branson, August 2nd through 4th. That's sold out in about 5 days, but streaming video registration, streaming video sign-up now available at the website defenderconference.com for information there, and sign up. Log on to defenderconference.com. All presentations in high-definition streaming video and available for 3 months, 90 days after the conference itself. Also in Branson this year, the True Legends Conference. That's in September, the 13th through the 15th. Answering the Alien Question is the theme. L.A. Marzulli, Steve Quayle, Timothy Alberino, prominent ufologists like Richard Dolan, Chase Kletsky, George Knapp. Dr. Hugo de Garis returns this year. He wowed the audience at the Transhumanism Conference last year for True Legends, so we hope we can see you there. Yours truly, honored to serve as the Master of Ceremonies. So, again, the Mansion Theater in Branson, the setting September 13th through the 15th, 2019, to register for that conference. And don't wait, because this will sell out. Gen6.com is the website, GENSIX.com. Backing up into August again, August 16th through the 18th, we'll be in Lubbock, Texas. Sharon and I speaking at the Sons of God, Giants of Old Conference. August 16th through 18th, this is at the Fellowship in Lubbock, Texas, the church pastored by Dan Crestman there. Dr. Judd Burton coordinating the conference, and as we get closer to the date, we will have more information for you. In October, we've got 2 conferences. First, San Antonio, October 4th through the 6th. That's the Unsealed Scroll Prophecy Conference. Sharon and I speaking along with Rabbi Jonathan Kahn, L.A. Marzulli, Bill Salas, Pastor Carl Gallups, Jim Barfield of the Copper Scroll Project, Pastor Billy Crone, Paul McGuire, Ryan Pitterson, author of Judgment of the Nephilim, a recent guest here on A View from the Bunker. Music by John Schlitt. The legendary John Schlitt will be singing for us, and that is something you won't want to miss. This all takes place at the Grand Hyatt in San Antonio on the Riverwalk. To sign up, log on to unsealedscroll.org, unsealedscroll.org, and save 20% with the promo code Gilbert20 at checkout, Gilbert20. Sharon and I, by the way, will be the keynote speakers at Luncheon with the Speakers on Sunday. So we're looking forward to doing that together, and we hope we can see you there. The following weekend, we head to the West Coast, go to California for Hear the Watchmen. Coming to California, the Hilton Irvine Orange County Airport. L.A. Marzulli, we'll see him 2 weekends in a row. People will talk. Russ Dizdar, Messianic Rabbi Zev Porat, Pastor Paul Begley, Stephen Bankars, and Josh Peck, our friends from co-authors of The Second Coming of the New Age. Gans Shimura, glad to see him getting an opportunity to speak. Michael Boldea, Pastor Phil Core, Troy Anderson, and Paul McGuire, and more. That'll be October 11th through 13th at the Hilton Irvine Orange County Airport. Don't wait on that one. Sign up now at hearthewatchmen.com. And if you're interested in visiting the Holy Land, Even though you're hearing this while we are still there now, we're already making plans for next year. We will be back, the SkyWatch TV Tour of Israel 2020, May 11th through the 25th of 2020. We've already got people signing up now. It's never too early to plan. And it will profoundly impact you, seeing the sites that you've been reading about in the Bible for so many years. Lipkin Tours coordinating it. So for information, log on to lipkintours.com. That's lipkintours.com. Hey, leave us a review, whether it's at Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, wherever you're listening, which, of course, is wherever fine podcasts are sold. We appreciate getting a thumbs up there, and also a like at our Facebook page, where you can discuss the issues we discuss here. That's facebook.com/viewfromthebunker, which is a production of Gilbert House and released under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Our opening theme is Iron Bacon by Kevin MacLeod. His website is incompetech.com. Our announcer, DC Good. Remember, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.